The classics author I love more than any other is Thomas Hardy. George Eliot, I am so sorry. I love Hardy's miserable stories, his political critiques, his centering of women and people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, his adorable but not entirely funny dad's sense of humour, his rambling descriptions of Wessex, his complex love triangles that should really be described as love polygons, his pacing, his foreshadowing, and the scandal his novels caused Victorian England. And it's time BookTube celebrated Hardy with a readathon. So that is why the wonderful Gemma from Gem of Books and I put our heads together. Not physically, we do live in separate countries, but we created Misery May, a readathon dedicated to Thomas Hardy and his particular style of depressing. We have 6 prompts and a group read. For the group read, Gemma and I decided the ideal starting place for Thomas Hardy is possibly the most depressing book ever written, Jude the Obscure. Easily the most miserable book where the protagonist is called Jude. Don't you dare mention you know who. Hardy can develop characters. If you've never read Thomas Hardy, then Jude is a real litmus test. We're not easing you into Hardy with, say, Far From the Madding Crowd. No, Jude the Obscure is full on miserable and depressing. If you like Jude, you'll like Hardy. And a lot of mega fans start with that book. Also, a lot of mega haters start with Jude too, so give and take. When I first read Jude, I knew it scandalized the Victorians. And I thought, like any reasonable person who had read a few Victorian novels, what could be so shocking? Bare ankles? Jude is a novel that was so shocking that Hardy couldn't handle the hate after he published it, and it was his last novel. He lived for another 32 years but would only write poetry in that time. So if you want to know what the Victorians found so scandalous as to cancel Hardy, join us for the readathon. And it was slightly more shocking than Bare Ankles. There will be a Voxer group for chatting. Send me a message on Voxer if you want to join us. My Voxer is in the show notes. Now on to the prompts. There are 6 prompts. Half of them, that's 3 if you're not very talented at maths, are what we are calling the core prompts. And the other half, again, that's still 3 if you're not good at maths, they're the buzzword prompts. We've basically ripped off Kayla's buzzword idea because she has great ideas, and we've given it a Hardy twist because everything tastes better with a twist of Thomas Hardy. That joke feels uncomfortably sexual, and that was not my intention. Prompt 1. Read a novel by Thomas Hardy. Hardy wrote 14 novels, so you have choices. You could join us for the group read, or you might have picked up on what I said earlier about easing yourself into Hardy and decide that you want to begin with Far From the Madding Crowd. Don't be weak. Don't be weak. You also might want to try Hardy's most famous novel, the feminist melodrama Tess of the D'Urbervilles. You might want to go off the beaten path and try Hardy's first novel, Desperate Remedies, which, unlike Hardy's other novels, is a Victorian sensationalist novel in the style of Wilkie Collins, but it's still quintessentially Hardy. There is the dark but short Under the Greenwood Tree if you have limited time, the twisted study of toxicity, that is the Mayor of Casterbridge, or you could meet 2 of my favourite characters of all time, Eustacia Vi and Diggory Venn, and read The Return of the Native. I will be making a video about every Hardy novel before this readathon starts, so you can get a bit of insight into all 14 books and make your selection wisely. Prompt number 2. Read a poem or a short story by Hardy. Hardy wasn't just a novel writer, he wrote numerous poems and short stories. You can read an entire collection or just a short story or a poem. We're making things easy for you. I recommend The Darkling Thrush if you're into poetry, and I enjoyed The Romantic Adventures of a Milkmaid if you're into short stories, but there is a massive selection out here. Prompt number 3. Read a devastating book. Yeah, a sad book or a miserable book. It doesn't have to be written by Thomas Hardy, but if you want to go down the Hardy route, then feel free to redo prompt 1. If you're struggling for ideas here, Gemma and I have both asked a bunch of our favourite booktubers to recommend a book for this prompt, and those videos will go up in exactly a week's time, so make sure you subscribe to both of our channels. And now our 3 buzzword prompts. For each of these prompts, we've picked a lesser known Thomas Hardy novel and picked words that are somehow important to that novel. From that, you just have to pick a book that makes sense, and as long as you can justify it, it's fine. we're not going to be the word police here. So the first prompt comes from the novel A Pair of Blue Eyes, and it's a novel that coined the phrase cliffhanger. It was a serialized novel where you'd get a new chapter every week, and at the end of one chapter, Hardy literally left a character hanging on the edge of a cliff. That was before it was a massive cliche. The following chapter involved using underwear to try and save our cliffhanging hero. So your prompt here is to pick a book that relates either to cliffhanger or underwear. So you might want to pick a suspenseful novel that is full of cliffhangers. You might want to pick a sexy novel that is full of underwear, or not a lot of underwear depending on your tastes. You might pick A Pair of Blue Eyes because, after all, why not? The Shakespeare play King Lear and the Raynor Winn novel The Salt Path both contain important scenes with cliffs, and if you wanted to go down the underwear path, you might look at Butts, A Backstory. You could even pick up something like Melissa Broder's The Pisces, or really any other sexy novel you can think of. The Vegetarian by Han Kang is about a woman who refuses to wear a piece of underwear, and even Layla Motley's Nightcrawling would work for this prompt, and also for prompt 3, I will add. The next prompt is from the novel A Laodicean. This is a novel that Hardy wrote when he thought he was on his deathbed, and it is semi-autobiographical. Now, before Hardy was a writer, he was an architect, and this novel centres both buildings and architecture. So again, you could pick this Hardy novel for the prompt, or you might want to pick Ken Follett's Pullers of the Earth. Maybe you would like to try a classic such as Franz Kafka's The Castle or Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, both books with buildings in the title. Staying with classics, you could pick Northanger Abbey or Wuthering Heights, two novels named after buildings. V.S. Naipaul's Mr. Biswar's House or The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot. Sorry, George. If you're reading the Woman's Prize long list, you might even pick up Children of Paradise, which is about a cinema. Or if you want to go down the Aussie route, you could pick up every Aussie high school student's required reading, Cloud Street by Tim Winton. Again, lots of options here, very easy to justify, I think. The last prompt comes from the novel Two on a Tower. Interestingly, this book would actually work for the last prompt, and the tower in question is an observatory. Astronomy is a massive part of this book, and your prompts are stars and astronomy. So you might pick up The Pull of the Star by Emma Donoghue or The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. I feel like there are a lot of sci-fi books that would just work for this prompt, but you might like to go down the non-fiction path and read A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking or Carl Sagan's Cosmos. You could go for Bertolt Brecht's classic play The Life of Galileo, or you could take stars in a very different direction and pick Taylor Jenkins Reid, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, or Jeanette McCurdy's I'm Glad My Mum Died. I think there's lots of options for this one too. And that's all the prompts. I do hope you'll join us. Now, a quick note, all of Hardy's works are available for free on Project Gutenberg. So if you're struggling for money, and let's face it, late stage capitalism sucks, who isn't? You don't have to spend a cent on an electronic version of any of his books. You can do this readathon entirely with Thomas Hardy books. You could clear out your TBR, or you could discover something new at your library. I hope you will join Gemma and myself for Misery May. Bye bye.